All systems go. Okay.
All right.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Technical Solutions and Things to Consider for Broadband Expansion. My name is Carla Fowler with the Tug Hill Commission. I'm here with my colleague and counterpart, Elena Millette, to host the third webinar in our three-part series, Preparing for Broadband Infrastructure Investment in Rural Communities. For this webinar, you are muted and your video is turned off. Please ask questions in the chat box and we will address them as we go or after the presentation as it makes sense. Our recording of this and previous webinars will be available from our YouTube channel. And please visit our website for information on past and upcoming training. We'll add the links to the chat box. Today's presenter is David Wolf, Director of Telecommunications with the Development Authority of the North Country. Mr. Wolf has more than 30 years of telecom network experience in a variety of executive management and engineering roles. At DINC, he is responsible for all aspects of the 1,800 fiber mile telecommunications network. Prior to joining DINC, Mr. Wolf was Chief Operating Officer for Patient Portal Connect, Inc., a healthcare service provider. Dave was also the Chief Technology Officer at Telergy, where he led the team that raised a $200 million high-yield bond. Dave began his career at Verizon, where he held many different engineering and sales support roles. Dave has a bachelor's of technology degree in chemical engineering from the University of Dayton and an MBA from Chapman University. Mr. Wolf has also served as an adjunct professor at Syracuse University and SUNY Polytechnic Institute. Dave, thank you for joining us today. And with no further delay, I now hand it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Carla. I really appreciate it. And, thanks to the Tug Hill Commission for putting the series on. So, and like Carla said, please feel free to, ask questions in the chat. It's always better if there's some questions in between. Real quickly, I'm just gonna do one or two quick slides on who the Development Authority is. Most people know that. Some things that you should consider when planning for broadband in your areas. I'll talk a little bit about the Tupper Lake project. It was a little bit of a unique project for us. Some of the technology options that you have. And then I was asked to kind of put together some grant opportunities and some contacts of people who might be able to help as you move through your plan. Real quickly on the Development Authority of the North Country, we were formed in 1985, primarily because of the reactivation of the 10th Mountain Division. Our first services were to bring water and to take sewer, water and sewer treatment for Fort Drum. So we run a water, we have about 85 employees. We are revenue driven. We have to raise enough money through fees to provide the services we provide, and that we're a little bit unique in that most public authorities are single services. We have multiple based infrastructure facilities, including a water and sewer division, the telecommunications division, engineering services, community development, and of course the regional landfill. And this is the Telecommunications Network. This is the division that I run. We have about 1,800 miles of network. Most of that is our own. Some of it is leased from other people. And we have 30 central offices. That's where we house the equipment that delivers the services that we provide. And we are really a regional transport company. We don't provide voice, we don't provide internet, we provide connectivity for other service providers who then deliver the services over our network. So we do have many private networks. We have a lot of healthcare facilities, education facilities that we connect directly to each other, but we don't sell them internet or voice. So getting into what we're really mostly interested in, some of the things to consider, when you're developing plans for the broadband in your communities. The first thing I always say is, don't start with. Everybody wants to start with, hey, how do we get this technology out there? And I think it's really important to start with what are your goals first, because those goals really do impact the technology decisions, the design, the strategy that you want to put forward, and the communications that you have with your stakeholders, whether they're the community itself or your board or whoever it is. All of, you really want to build all of this off of what you're trying to accomplish, not just get broadband out there. And there are several of those strategies. Some people, obviously serving the unserved is typically the most important one. So that addresses the availability issue. But sometimes we see, people looking at strategies to help with some cost structures to make it more affordable for students and elderly and for people on low income, so that they can participate in the broadband services as well. Sometimes it's underserved. So really underserved means one of two things. Either there's only one provider in the area and you want to have some competition, or there is services, but they don't meet the minimum standards that the FCC or New York State has put on them, which right now is, for the federal government, is still 25 megs down, 3 megabits per second up. We've seen some strategies around just helping out the school children. And in some cases, it's really an economic development or technology development driven, in that, maybe there's an economic development zone that you want to create, and you want to have services, really high quality services, and maybe even be able to incent people to move in by providing free services for a while. Or in a few instances where people wanted, to get more technology driven businesses in the area. And so those are all different goals that have different, strategies behind them, and oftentimes different technologies selection behind them. The next thing that you really want to do is determine the services. I mean, we mostly talk about internet, but if you want to offer cable TV or streaming video or voice, that will impact both the design of your network and the service providers that you want to work with. Not everybody has all of those in their toolbox. So you want to make sure that you think about those things and determine what's most important. And are there any value add services that you're looking to do? Is there some public emergency upgrades that you'd like to do? Is there some telemetry that you want to do in your community? Would you like to have a free Wi-Fi corridor for the downtown area? And if you do, how do you want to present that to people? Do you want it to just be a free basic service, or do you want to have it be revenue driven, where people can advertise and you can provide coupons and local businesses to, 50% off lunch or whatever. So there are different types of services there. Is there some healthcare applications that you're looking to deliver to the home? So those are all things that you have to be thinking about. The next step is always to check if there's already some funding, if it's already been funded. We've had some areas where people really voiced, concern about there being no broadband, but you see there's already been an award. And then if there is, you want to meet with the people who got that award to see when the services will be built. And I mentioned the Rural Development Opportunity Fund only because that's a very recent award, but it has a 6 year build time. So you want to be working with the service providers who got those monies to say, hey, when in this 6 year time frame will you be done? And that may impact your decision on what you do. And then when you have all that down, you kind of look at all of the options that are out there, consider, the different alternatives and the costs and benefits of each, and then select the best solution to match your goals. And that solution is not just the technology, but also the service provider, who's going to be who's going to actually do that. In some cases, it's been even communities. And if that's your decision, that then there's different things you have to think about. So I wanted to give a little background on the Tupper Lake project, and then we, follow through those same processes that we did that I just talked about. So the background on that is that really the town and the village board members had been hearing from people about a lack of broadband and concerns about broadband. And so 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, they developed a broadband committee to see what could be done. And they started doing some analysis. They heard a lot from the business community. So they did a survey of the downtown corridor because they wanted to make sure they helped the business community. And while that whole corridor had service, they had a lot of issues. 53% had speed issues, that they were concerned that they couldn't get enough bandwidth to do what was necessary for their business, which is a high number. 40% had cost issues, but I find that it's interesting because they didn't like the cost, but they had the service, so they would just like it to be a little bit less. But the majority of the complaints were service related. There was a lot of comments about days long outages where they couldn't process credit cards, they can't get email orders and things like that. That it's hard to get in touch with the provider. There are slow response times, and so. And even though they didn't survey the people who were unserved, they surveyed the downtown corridor that had services. They did get many comments and responses from folks who said, "Hey, I know we weren't in the target area, but we really need services." So the goals that the committee had were, number one, to provide a better solution for the downtown corridor and the business community. They wanted to be able to service the entire town so that they had 100% served. They wanted to have a Wi-Fi corridor in the downtown area, and they, although this was not critical, they did discuss several value add services, like a technology center, maybe even using some students to help do some of the configurations on some of the wireless equipment at the home. And get them, trained up so that they could maybe get interested in technology and eventually wind up helping the town with their services. So those were the goals that they had. To determine what the services that were required, the first thing that we did, the Development Authority did, was we drove every road in the town. So we wanted to see where services were available today to make sure that when we identified who the unserved were, that we had a really good picture. We happened to have some outside plants, some fiber engineers, including one who used to work, did a lot of cable TV work. So they know what they're looking at. They know where those locations are. And we did drive every road in town and developed a map. We came up with a plan. We collectively, when I say we, I'm talking about, this was a joint venture with the town of Tupper Lake and the Development Authority of the North Country. So the grant application that went in was actually a joint grant application between those two entities. We decided on a fiber to the premise for downtown. And the reason we did the fiber to the premise is because the Development Authority has existing infrastructure through a lot of that corridor. So our grant was for $200,000. That would have cost probably $400,000 to $500,000 if there wasn't some existing infrastructure already. So we were able to capitalize on that existing infrastructure to come up with this fiber to the premise plan. And we decided to use wireless for the unserved, and you'll see why in a minute. There's a map that'll show you the area and what the unserved area is, and to build fiber all the way out there would have been very difficult. We did look to see if there was any funding through the RDOF for New York State Broadband, and there had not been. So we decided to do a Northern Border Regional Commission grant, and we were awarded that. And again, part of that was because we were using the existing infrastructure, and the town, it's a town and network. The town of Tupper Lake is actually going to be owning some of that the wireless infrastructure. Obviously, the Development Authority will own the fiber infrastructure, but the town is going to own the wireless infrastructure. And they had debated between them actually being a service provider, and I think when they looked at all of the operations support required, they decided that they would probably rather work with somebody who already does this for a living. So we developed an RFI. And the good news for folks that are listening is we had 4 very qualified companies that responded to that RFI. It was very, very competitive. I think any of the 4 would have been fine to work with. We've narrowed it down to one. I don't want to say yet because it's not finalized, but The good news is, we had 4 people respond. They all understood what we were looking for. They all could do the things that we were looking to do. And the town now is deciding whether or not, they're going to be involved because they're going to own some of the infrastructure. And now they're deciding, do they want to brand this as a Tupper Lake network, or do they want to just allow the service provider they pick and just say the town's supporting this, but it's I'll say, I don't want to say who it is, so I'll say it's a dank network, but it's not a dank network because we're not the service provider, but so they're still deciding how to brand that. And we're also looking at organizational structures for them, because one of the things that the town may do is own this for 5 or 10 years or however long they decide, and then eventually may just turn it over to a service provider. So we've got to look at structurally how to set that up as well. We don't want to have it be the town of Tupper Lake. They'll set up a separate entity within the town that will do this. And so we're talking to some folks who understand that structure. This next slide is a picture of the town of Tupper Lake, and you'll see that the green area on that map. I don't know if you see my cursor or not, but if you can, this green area is the served area. It's not a very elegant drawing. We drove all the roads, but when we had it mapped, we just said just surround the point. Even though it's not big in terms of the total size of the town, a good chunk of the northern and southern part of the town are state land and or owned by logging rights. And so there aren't a lot of homes there. The majority of the homes that aren't served are up around the Big Wolf to the north here, over on the west side of Tupper Lake, and over down around here. That's where the wireless will go. So over 90%, even though it's a small land mass wise, 90% plus of the homes are served. We did count up 125 unserved. We used mapping to determine that. We have a GIS mapping software that shows us where all the parcels are. And we actually zoomed in, scrolled over all the parcels and counted up the homes. We didn't count any of the state or logging land. And we were able to determine that with 3 wireless nodes, we will be able to serve the unserved. Now, the reason for that is right down here is Mount Morris. We happen to have fiber at the top of Mount Morris, and so you get very good coverage of a good chunk of the town that is unserved right from that one location. There's also a couple of water towers that we're going to use for this project. So that's the wireless part of it. The fiber to the premise part of this is the village of Tupper Lake, and this red line is where the red lines are the fiber to the premise part. So again, the Development Authority had infrastructure through the majority of this. We're adding a little bit here with some of these extensions, but we're overlashing or using existing fiber in many cases, and overlashing where we need more fiber. Build fiber right to every business and residence along this path. And one of the things that we did for the grant, this is just a small piece of the beginning of it, we overlaid the parcels that we will be serving. So you can see every single parcel that we will touch with this grant. There was like 6 pages of those. I'm not going to go through all of them, but that gave us a really good idea of the parcels. One of the things that we'll talk about, but I wanted to mention for the Tupper Lake project, this looks pretty odd, but one of the things that you have to make sure whenever you're planning for broadband, you have to make sure that you're designing them for growth. So this red line that you see, that's the phase, what we are calling phase 1. And that is what the grant is providing for. We said we can't design the network to just be done at the end of phase 1. We would like to be able to expand. The town would like to be able to expand. So green is what we called phase 2, and purple is phase 3. So as things go and as we grow, and hopefully it's very successful, we will start to add to the network And the reason that's important is we wanted to make sure that we designed both the equipment in the central office to be scalable enough to be able to handle that growth. And we wanted to be able to make sure that we had enough connections out in the field to be ready for that growth as well. And so we did a pretty detailed design. In the end, if we do all three phases, it will be about 70% of the town would be covered by this fiber to the premise network. The first phase is a little over about 15 or so percent. And then you need detailed designs. Like you can't go into this thinking that you know what you're going to have. We actually laid out, before we did the grant, we laid out on a street by street basis. This is just phase one. This is every single telephone pole that we're connecting to, how many customers are off of that pole, where all of the fiber terminals are going, where the equipment, we have some passive optical networks that we're putting out in the field. That's what these different colors are. That's where those passive optical networks start and end. And so that told us exactly, we did the same thing. We drove this route in detail and we looked at actually the power line drops into places, because many of the downtown corridor buildings are multi-tenant buildings. So you can't just say it's one building, it's one customer. So we went through and actually counted out how many power lines were going into each of the buildings to develop how many customers there are. So I guess the point here is, I know you can't really see all that stuff very well, but the point is make sure you think about not just the first phase, but what else you might do, and then have really good design so that you can feel comfortable that your budget is within a pretty small percentage. So that's it for Tupper Lake. If there's any questions, send them in, but that's really what we did with Tupper Lake. We are, status of that real quickly, we're starting the build pretty soon. We've been delayed a little bit with all of the state and federal money out there. We're actually being delayed a little bit by the getting fiber cable. They keep pushing out the delivery of the cable. It's getting harder and harder to get equipment and cable right now. So we had hoped to be started already. We're working on finalizing the service provider and then working with the town to decide if how involved they're going to be with the service provider. When it comes to technology choices, there's kind of two real main choices. One is what they call wireline, which is really fiber or coax. Fiber to, you'll hear the term fiber to the premise, fiber to the home, gigabit passive optical networks. That's all different names of technologies that basically mean you're running fiber down the pole line and then going into each individual structure. Cable TV is the same thing. It can be on coax or it can be on fiber, but it's still, constructing into the homes. When you do that, it's generally more costly and time consuming, certainly. It takes a lot longer to get the make-ready process done, and things can take, used to be maybe 6 to 9 months. Now it's more like 9 months to a year, sometimes faster, but generally speaking. But it should be pretty future-proof. When you run fiber, that has a carrying capacity that is extremely high. The bandwidth you can provide on that is very high. So it's really just a matter of upgrades in technology in terms of lasers and receivers and stuff. So you shouldn't have to replace that fiber for a long time, 30 years or more. Wireless is a different story. There's a big variety of wireless services, and the technology changes a little more quickly. So you probably want to figure about a 5-year replacement strategy. So if you're going to put a wireless network out there, you want to be thinking in terms of, okay, I want to make sure I have a break even in well less than 5 years, because in 5 years, I'm probably going to need to replace a lot of my equipment. If you want to stay up with the speeds and the requirements of your customer base. There's fixed wireless, which you hear the term wireless internet service providers, or WISPs, and I've got a list of those folks down later for in the contacts. Fixed wireless is really just where you place an antenna on a tower, or it can be a pole, it can be a lot of different things, but where you place an antenna on there and you actually have a receiver at your end. You've got a small antenna. It's not the old dishes, but it's a small, oftentimes just a square box that goes on your house somewhere. And that's the receiver. It feeds down into a modem, just like your cable modem, or if you have Fios or something like that. So there's point-to-point networks, and we'll show a diagram of that, and point-to-multipoint, show you that real quickly. Again, they're typically more cost-effective. Scalability and usage have to be watched. The bandwidth on wireless networks is fixed, and so the more users you get, the slower the speed for each individual. And there are licensed and unlicensed frequencies, and we'll talk a little bit about that quickly. And then compare the fixed wireless to mobile. Mobile is, as everybody knows, that's your cell phone network. It's typically 4G right now, but it's going to 5G. 5G is supposed to be much, much faster. And when I say 5G prep, we'll talk about that in a second, but a lot of times people come to us and say, we really need a second provider. We need some choice. We don't like having just one service provider. And in many cases, it doesn't make sense to build out a whole nother network. But if you start to look at 5G as a second choice, and people do feel that it definitely will have enough bandwidth to get to your home. In the areas that we serve, it's probably a few years out, but instead of building a whole other network, maybe it might be better to prep for 5G and look at how you can help people do that. And I've got a slide a little bit down on that. I am not a wireless expert, so I did ask Hudson Valley Wireless, who we work with quite a bit, to provide a few slides, and I'm going to go at this just at a high level. If there's any questions on this part, we can get it to the right people, because I'm a fiber network guy, not a wireless person. We dabble in it, but we're not experts at it. But I guess the point is a couple of things on this slide. One, wireless can be point to multi-point, so that means from one antenna to a lot of houses. And a lot of people think you have to get fiber to that antenna, but you don't. Sometimes you just shoot from that antenna to another one, and you can serve houses from there. So you can find antennas in remote places. We did some work for one of the schools where we put them on some silos out in the middle of nowhere, and we shot from one location where we did have fiber out to that silo, and then distributed the antenna system from that silo. Or from a very remote antenna somewhere. So water towers, public emergency antennas, all those things can be utilized for the wireless networks. And again, this is a fixed wireless network. This is not a mobile network. It's similar though. This next one just says choosing the right tool for the job. When it comes to wireless, there are many frequencies available. And if you can read that, your eyes are pretty good. But and anywhere from 470 megahertz up to 60 gigahertz. The FCC administers this, and they have certain frequencies within there that are available for wireless networking. General rule of thumb: the lower the bandwidth, the lower the megahertz, the lower the frequency. I'm sorry, the lower the frequency, the less throughput, the less bandwidth you get. The higher the frequency, the higher the bandwidth. But conversely, the lower frequencies go farther and can get through trees and things like that and around buildings much better. So the lower frequencies have less bandwidth, but they sometimes can go through things better. So we've seen now recently, when it says choosing the right tool for the job, sometimes it might be more than one tool. You might want to have some higher bandwidth stuff and some lower bandwidth things so that you can get to the harder to get places. So we're seeing people deploying a couple of different types of antennas and frequencies. And so it shows you here the different frequencies that are available for networking, all the way up to this almost 60 gigahertz range. It shows you the band amount. So the more bandwidth that's available, the more so it's not just the frequency, but also how much bandwidth is available within that range. So you can see there's a couple of them that have a much higher bandwidth than the others. The license exempt means you don't need to have a license. So these are mostly unlicensed frequencies, but there are some that are unlicensed, but require you to at least check that you're not overlapping with other people in the area. The good news about unlicensed frequencies is anybody can use them. The bad news is sometimes if there's another person using that same frequency, you get some collisions and you get some, lower throughput. And then, there's different types of the technology names, but the different types of technologies that they are used for mobile versus fixed wireless. Some of these are strictly for mobile, and some of these are strictly for the fixed wireless solution. One of the promising technologies is this LTE, which stands for long-term evolution. It is it's not a newer technology, but it's 4G is based on LTE. Some 4G technologies are based on LTE. But the one thing about LTE is some of the newer antennas are 4G today, but upgradable to 5G already, just with some software. They have to be changed out. And the user equipment, the -UE, means that a lot of people say, well, why can't I just take my tablet anywhere or my laptop anywhere? Well, with the LTE-user equipment, you can. They have defined the protocols to allow different cameras, laptops, tablets, as well as your phone to talk to those antennas, and you can have mobile everything. Cost more, the licensing costs more. There's a bit more of a service fee because now the provider, whoever that service provider is, has to register your tablet and your laptop to make sure it's all authorized to operate on their network. Authorized to operate on their network, meaning that you're paying them for that. So that's a promising technology, and it's one that in Lewis County we're planning. We've put some grants out for that type of technology because there is the possibility that through some of these wireless user groups that you could actually use those same antennas and lease them out to the mobile providers, the T-Mobiles and the Verizons and AT&Ts, potentially. They generally like to build their own, but if there's existing infrastructure, they may. It's a busy slide, and I'll go through it pretty quickly, but the technology choices, one of the things that we talked about is if you look at these are all mapping softwares. That the pink dots are homes, and the lines are fiber or coax. Their service provider, fiber to the home or coax to the home, broadband to the home. And the reason I say that is when you look at technology choices, there are certain areas like this where the density is low. I hope you can see my mouse, but on the top left one, you can see where there's a lot, the density is low and the distance is significant. You're probably only going to get people to do wireless out here. To build fiber to those areas would be very costly. Many of these are probably camps along the water and the river. And so they're seasonal. There's nothing wrong with camps, but oftentimes those people are only there for 3 months out of the year that they want to pay. The one to the right of that is a good example of where this one road is surrounded by infrastructure. And you're better off in here going to the existing, this happens to be, I know this area happens to be cable TV. So this is the cable TV, the local cable provider. You're better off going to the local cable provider as a municipality and saying, what can we do with you to get this done? And I know that they've reached out to many of the folks for this NTIA grant money. We're going to talk about some funding sources in just a second. And this third example is kind of a combination. There is some infrastructure around there, but there's also quite a few homes in the area. And so you could kind of look at this either way, and some of it depends on the timing, but also in this example, you'd probably think more wireless only because while there is some good density in areas, there's also some low density in areas, and the wireless will allow you to cover both, where the fiber to the home, they might not want to do some of these places. So just showing you some examples of things we've seen. I think most of the people are familiar with the studies that are being done by ECC Technologies. The last thing I wanted to show you is when you're talking technology choices is if you're going wireless, make sure that you're working with a wireless company, give you really good mapping information. That we see a lot of coverage maps and they vary quite a bit in terms of capabilities amongst people. Some people just, it's like well, this is what my mapping shows, it's best guess. It takes the topology into into its formula, but it doesn't do much else. And others have all the trees and the structures built in, and they have the ability to individually check whether they get proper signal to each individual 911 address or home. So, you want to be, if you want really good information, it's going to cost you some more money, but it's going to give you really good coverage. And then the second one down here shows in our GIS group was able to take those coverage maps, overlay it with 911 addresses and parcels, and count up for us without us having to try and go through and look at each individual place. Through software, we're able to determine exactly how many parcels or how many homes we're going by. So things to consider again, who is the service provider? Is it wireless or fiber? Do they have local technicians? Is their reputation good? Do they have enough people in the call center so that you can get to them? Is there good community support? And are they involved? If you're going to be partnered up with somebody, you want to make sure that they've got your best interest. And biggest thing is, how many people do they have who can help fix problems immediately? You don't want them being sent from, if you're in Tupper Lake, you don't want to wait for somebody from Rochester to show up to fix your network. Operation support is one that we just talk about because I've heard several municipalities say they were interested in starting maybe to look into broadband. And the biggest failure of all municipal networks is the back office. It's the network monitoring and management. It's the customer service. It's the provisioning. It's knowing that you have all the equipment available, knowing how to turn it up. It's billing and collections. It's tax rules. It's regulations. It's regulatory filings. There's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes besides just the technology. And so you want to make sure that you look into all those things before you make that leap. So we just put that down as a caution. And if you're going to work with a provider, you need to think about that. We already talked about, sustainability is a big one. You want to think about, is this financially, you want to make sure that it's financially viable, that even at a lower take rate than you're expecting, you're still going to be okay. You have to make sure that you have the ability to upgrade and grow the network. You have to make sure that you can add new services as they come or as you want to. Can you peer with Google so that people can, the schools can do their work. And another big one is project tracking. If you're going to do a network, you want to make sure that you lay out what the goals are, like we said, because you can develop then some key performance indicators and then show that your project is a success or if it isn't. A lot of times we hear people say, well, that wasn't successful because of this. Well, if you've already laid out your goals and that wasn't in your goals, then you can say, no, that wasn't what we were trying to do. So it is a success because we did what we were trying to do. But you can't do that if you don't have the goals in the beginning. So think about that tracking and think about how you're going to measure whether or not that's successful. The other things to consider is speed. The federal government says 25/3. The newer grants say they prefer 100/20. I think the state would like 100/100, and other people feel that's the way to go. But if you look at this map or this graph down below, you can see that this is the average broadband in consumption per household from 2013 to 2021. You can see that demand just keeps growing. So if 25/3 is considered marginally okay today, it's not going to be okay in another year or two. So you want to make sure that you have the ability to get to speeds more like this or more. And like it says here, the price per megabit, the good news is the price per megabit is down. The bad news is people are consuming a lot more, so they need higher speeds. So you know, I think most people would say the prices are going up, but they're getting more for their dollar. Some of the things that, you know, people say, well, what can we do as a municipality? Some of the things that you want to be able to look at is identify assets that you have. There are many assets like water towers, public emergency locations, conduits, buildings, telemetry locations. Your own telecom expenses in some cases can be used to help, you know, drive a project by you know, either asking those for free if you're involved in a project, or by, you know, using that revenue stream as kind of the start of moving a project forward. Identify what your needs are. Many grants would be aided, you know, if they were able to add to the grant program that they're going to be able to help with the telemetry or some public emergency structures or stuff like that. So if you have some needs and you haven't done the upgrades yet, you know, identify those, and maybe you can work with a provider and say, hey, if you are going for a grant, include this, and I'll sign a letter that says that, yes, we need those things. This one is always controversial, but in very, very rural areas, some people will not, just can't seem to build because the taxes are high. So you might have to say, okay, if you build in this one small area where we don't have many people, we'll give you a break on the annual taxes on your fiber infrastructure. Stay informed. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're tracking all the grants and progress. Invite the service providers to work with you, and meet with the grant awardees. In particular, we're talking about with that RDOF grant. You want to talk to the people because it's just been awarded, and find out what is their plans and how long are they going to take to get that in, because it's got up to 6 years. Develop goals in advance. There's things that we have done like joint builds, revenue share, asset leases, swaps, etc. So there are ways that you can kind of maybe work with a couple of providers to say, can you guys help out here or there? And plan for these public-private partnerships. The NTIA grant is built on that. So think about how you want to do that. What organizational structure would you use for partnering? Who's going to own the assets? If you go into a public-private partnership with a service provider, you know, in the case of the NTIA grant, they would prefer that it's the public entity, the county, the town, the village, that is the lead on that. So are you willing to own the assets and lease them to the service provider, or are you just going to be part of the grant, let them take them? What are the wireless assets? And like I said, some temporary tax incentives to let them get started. I'm almost done. Grant opportunities. We were asked, what are some of the grant opportunities? I think this one, the emergency broadband benefits started May 12th. Individuals have to register for that. There's an emergency connectivity fund that's really for schools and libraries, but it does fund some Wi-Fi hotspots. And then because because it includes connections to students and staff, you know, there are abilities maybe to work with the community as well. The NTIA Consolidated Appropriations Act just started. It's a $300 million fund. This is the one that has to be a public-private partnership, and the grants are due August 17th. The services that they prefer are at least 100 megabits down, 20 megabits up. There's an NTIA tribal grant. There's a Reconnect Phase 2 that just closed on April 15th, but keep an eye out for the winners and see if there's any awardees in your footprint to see what might be coming. There's the American Rescue Plan that included $315 billion for the states, and that includes one of the eligible expenditures is broadband. There is a PSC settlement fund. It's a small amount, but it may help to fill some of these small gaps, like that one slide we showed where you've got that one road. That is opening in September. I don't have a lot of information on there, but I'm sure the Department of Public Service or the PSC website would have some information on that. You may be able to tie into some of the public safety grants, at least for some antennas that you could use for other purposes. And the RDOF Phase 2 grant is $4.4 billion. That hasn't been announced yet, but I did include a link here that is the federal broadband funding opportunities, and it was just updated in February. So this is the last slide except for the question slide. So contacts, we were asked for about contacts. There are other contacts that I didn't include, which would be more of the governmental entities like the Department of Public Service, like the New York State Broadband Program Office, and several federal entities, but I didn't include them because I didn't want to leave people off. And I said, I'm not sure if I have them all. So, but there are others, certainly contacts that you could talk to. But I wanted to mention that, you know, on the fiber to the home part, on the fiber part, there is certainly Slick Network Solutions is the biggest one who does build fiber to the homes. I mean, besides, certainly there's Verizon, Frontier, and Spectrum, right? Those are the big three. And they're probably your first call. But Slick is doing a lot of work on fiber to the home. Adirondack Techs just started doing it. Just watch out because there's two Adirondack Techs. There's a technology-based company, and then these guys who do both fiber to the home and wireless. They're the only one on the list that does both. Citizens of Hammond does a little bit in Hammond and Alex Bay. TDS does some stuff in Jefferson and St. Lawrence County. And then West Telecom, First Light, Northland, they don't typically build fiber to the home, but if you're looking for a service provider to help support your network, these guys would all be good choices. I did not ask them for a name. Any name that's on here, I have asked them if it's okay. On the wireless ISP side, Hudson Valley Wireless, I mentioned them. They've done a great job on the mapping for us. Adirondack Techs does good work, and they're all, you know, Old Forge, up in the North Country quite a bit. Ridgeview focuses on Jefferson, a little bit of St. Lawrence and Lewis County. Mohawk Networks is up in St. Lawrence, Franklin, and Lewis. Wireless Internet Now, a little bit smaller, but they do work in Franklin and St. Lawrence, and I'm sure all of these guys are willing to expand and do different things. There's Eagle One Wireless in Old Forge and Inlet, CV Wireless in Essex County, and Rainmaker is in Eastern New York. I'm not sure exactly where Fred covers, but he's a good contact, a knowledgeable guy. So that's it. Just a couple reminders. My email if there's any questions, and I'm sorry for running a little longer than I expected.
Thank you very much, Dave. You covered a lot of territory there.
Yeah.
I dropped a link to the PDF guide that Dave was mentioning in his previous slide there in the chat for you all who are still connected. We did have a question from Michael for you, Dave. He says, how much more limited is the wireless bandwidth compared to wireline? And that came up during your frequency slide.
Yep.
We were talking about that.
So it depends on the frequency, but typically, you know, some of the lower frequency stuff, you can only get 25 or 50 megabits per second. The issue is as you get more users, there's only so much bandwidth. So like on an LTE that we talked about, the high end stuff, you can probably have 1,000 users before you start to really degrade the signal. On the low end stuff, you get to, you know, 100 users and it degrades a little bit. You get to 200-300 and you have to start putting more nodes in. Or, you know, because you're gonna just over subscribe that one node. So in those cases, it's truly just a matter of how much spectrum is available in that frequency. But that gives you some, you know, 100 to 1,000 depending on the type.
Thanks, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody has any other questions for Dave, feel free to drop them in the chat. Mr. Botar asks, how did you finance the original 1,800 miles that Dank has in place?
So the first 1,800 was really 450, and then we've grown since then. So we didn't finance the whole build, but the original network was $5 million in a New York State grant, $5 million of $5 million loan from an equipment company the equipment provider that we bought from, and another 10 million loan from the bank. And then since we've added to that, we've mostly financed our growth through internal revenue, but we did get we were a sub-award of a stimulus grant, the ARRA, a federal stimulus grant in 2008 or 9. Something like that. No, sorry, past that, where we did build across Franklin, Essex, and Clinton County.
Good question, David, and good answer, Dave.
Thanks.
And Dave, his follow-up question to you is, how was the bank loan secured?
I wasn't here then, so I do not know. I just know that it was paid off when shortly after I started, but I don't know, David, I'm sorry. I could find out, but I am not certain of that. I imagine that we have bonding capabilities, so I think we did get a bond for it.
Still checking out the chat, not seeing any other questions. We'll give it another second or two. And then I'll pass over to Carla to close us out. Yeah, looks like we're all set with questions.
Well, great job, Dave. And we certainly appreciate you taking the time to do this. Incredibly informative and timely. So again, thank you. And
yeah, thank you,
thank
guys.
you everyone for joining us today. I think Elena had put the links to past and future presentations. We've been doing lots of training, like a lot of other organizations. So that should be in the chat, and also a link to our YouTube. Please subscribe. You can watch this and other presentations later. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Carla. Take care, everyone.